So welcome everybody. This is our session on innovation in subnational governance. I'll introduce myself briefly. I'm Shireen Joshi. I teach here at the School of Foreign Service. I'm an economist by training, but when you teach at the School of Foreign Service, you become interested in issues of governance. So I do lots of work on India. I'm from India, and over the years, I'm increasingly focusing my own work on issues of subnational governance in India. So I'm delighted to introduce our speakers. Rick Rosso is sitting to the immediate left of me. He's a senior advisor and holds the Vadvani Chair in US-India Policy Studies at CSIS, which we heard about in the last panel.
Used to be based at Georgetown, so this is sort of a homecoming for CSIS.
I was going to say, he is Georgetown is not new for him. In his role, he helps frame and shape policies between the US and India, and he has a long experience of doing this. Before he was at CSIS, he was director for South Asia at McLarty Associates. And from 1998 to 2008, he served as deputy director for the US-India Business Council. So he has tons of experience in not just issues of governance in India, but subnational governance in particular. I'm also delighted to introduce Jayavardhan Singh, who is an MLA from the state, that's a member of Legislative Assembly in the state of Madhya Pradesh. He's the member of the 14th Vidhan Sabha. And he is the youngest MLA in India. And I think he's the youngest MLA in history, but he's so humble that he told me not to say that. And I'm going to say it anyway. He won the assembly election in 2013 with a huge margin of 59,000 votes. The highest amongst, I think, all the Congress party candidates that year. So he is definitely a person who will do great things, is my prediction. Previously, he's worked for the Rural Development Department, a subdivision of the Planning Commission of India. So again, as we think about issues of subnational governance, I cannot imagine a more interesting discussion than the one will unfold between the kind of two levels of governance that we see play out in India. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Rick. Maybe if you could provide some opening remarks. What do you think on issues of innovation and subnational governance in India? Big things happening. Then we'll go to Jayavardhan. And then very quickly, I hope we'll make this participatory with our audience.
Well, this is one of those moments I realize what a joker I am. Here I am growing up in rural Michigan, moving to DC and visiting the O'Brien Deli a few times. And that qualifies me as one of DC's great India experts. But sitting next to somebody that's actually run for election on the same kind of things I pretend to know a little bit about. So, pardon me, and let me know at least afterwards when I've embarrassed myself by being absolutely wrong. I'll say it's cool though that you picked this topic here because, as Irfan knows, for me, 20 years of working on U.S.-India relations, a lot of lip service has been paid over the years on the importance of Indian states. But really not much work beyond lip service to really kind of understand how important states are. Most people's lives in India are far more shaped by state governments than they are by the national government. State governments provide electricity, water, education, even law and order. And people can kind of play a bit of lip service to that, but really trying to figure out what's happening there and finding out ways to engage. And it's not just a Washington phenomenon. I mean, a lot of times, even in Delhi, when I show up in Delhi and I talk about regulatory reform that I'm watching in Uttar Pradesh or something like that, it's like I'm talking about a foreign country, or like I'm talking about a foreign planet or something like that. So now I will say that in terms of the overall topic, there's two main themes that I want people to sort of walk away with that I see happening right now in terms of innovation on center state governance. The first thing that I see right now is that I think that you do see state governments in India now versus 15 years ago. They do have a better understanding of kind of the bright lines on what they can do to reform their economies than they had back in the day. Going back 15 years ago, you began to see states take a variety of measures on things like electric power reform and water reform. And the state governments that did that, increasing rates or trying to cut off illegal connections and things like that, there was a real political price they paid, and a lot of great leaders were thrown out of office at that time. So I think states have started to understand a little bit more now in terms of what type of reform is possible and what is politically impossible. And you've seen that. I mean, one of my favorite statistics, any of you that have been in my room, a couple of you have, the thing I have on my wall is a map of Indian state elections going back to 1968. And you saw 25 years ago, there was a 10-year period where state governments had about a 25% reelection rate. 3 out of 4 state governments were thrown out during a 10-year period there. And so you look at that and you realize that the decisions they were trying to make then, you've got to learn from that. And especially, a lot of Indian politicians have relatively long lives in government. So 25 years ago seems like a million years ago here in the States, but a lot of the same leaders of the state governments in India are still hanging around right now, so it's not long ago for them. So the first is, state governments, I think, are understanding a lot better, and you see that indicated by higher reelection rates. The second thing is this idea about how the center and the state kind of engage with each other. At the time of Modi's election, you're talking about encouraging cooperative federalism and competitive federalism. I was skeptic number 1, 2, and 3 in this town. I thought it was ridiculous. I thought I've heard federal governments talk about this for a long time. Prime economists, everybody talking about getting states to compete, laboratories for reform. But in reality, the center just doesn't have a lot of tools to do that. So I was pretty skeptical. I've been surprised. I've been surprised at what the Modi government has been able to do on that front. I think taking away the Planning Commission and revamping it with NITI. I mean, some people randomly say, well, it's old wine in a new bottle. No, the Planning Commission made 5-year plans. This thing doesn't do that anymore. It pulls together groups of chief ministers to sit down and develop new plans and ideas consultatively. The Modi government is doing a very good job, I think, of sort of ranking states on business reforms, and now they're moving that to healthcare parameters too, so they're really holding states' feet to the fire. Also, as was mentioned by Griff in the last panel, this bailout scheme, the Uday bailout scheme, trying to reform state electricity grids. I mean, the electricity grids, in my opinion, are really the Achilles heel of a lot of state governments. The kind of debt that a lot of states have to carry around because of political promises made for free electricity and things. Now, this is the 3rd time, so this is not the first time I've seen, the Vajpayee government tried to do it, the Singh government tried to do it near the end. This is not the first time I've seen a massive bailout of the electricity grids. But it's a little bit like smoking, You never quit quitting. You got to keep trying to get the grids moving in the right direction, and hopefully one of these times it'll stick for kind of a long term. So I have seen, I think, the central government break out a little bit better set of tools than I had kind of thought and understood. The ranking states, they're providing draft model regulations and legislation for states. They're devolving a bit more authority to the states in some ways. So there are a couple of ways that I see, I think some innovation in what you see at the state level. They have better idea about the political parameters around reform, and the center is engaged with some new tools there.
Great.
That's it.
Thank you. Jayavardhan,
So firstly, I agree with Rick when he says that at the central level or at the national parliament level, there's more room for policy making, and that's where the overall macro policies are made. And also the members of parliament, of national parliament, have opportunities to be part of standing committees for bills which are being passed or bills which are being brought in. Whereas at the state level, it's more about implementation. And normally the decisions, the budget, it's all made by the ruling government, which is always in power. So in that way, at the state level, like in the past 3.5 years of my experience in Madhya Pradesh, there's not much which is demanded from the state MLAs to be part of the decisions, because it's made by the government in power, which is the chief minister and his cabinet of ministers. Whereas our role is actually more nurturing our constituency. And there's a big difference, because the state parliament, the average population of your voters is around 250,000 voters, whereas for a member of parliament of the national level, there's around 1.5 million voters. So it's a big difference. And at the state level, you really have to work and go village to village and literally know people in every village by name. So for example, in my constituency, it's around 500 villages and 2 towns of around a total population of around 80,000. So that part would live in the urban area, whereas the rest, around 150,000 people, would be living in the rural areas. And because we're talking about innovation in subnational government. And I did my master's from Columbia. And in fact, I had the opportunity to study under Arvind Panagaria, who is currently the vice chairman of the Niti Aayog. Columbia was famous for its 3 Js. There was Jagdish Bhagwati, there was Jeffrey Sachs, and there was Joseph Stiglitz. And I had the opportunity to work with all 3 of them at some level. And the main thing I noticed when I was studying in the US was there's so much interest in universities like Georgetown and Columbia to actually come and work with the greatest and the best minds in India. And like what Professor Joshi, you're doing yourself, I think it's an amazing thing that with your qualifications, with your background, you are able to give back something to India even at this level, which is, I think, really amazing. So, and as a politician, your work transcends every sector. So I have to have knowledge about power, about energy, about irrigation, about industry, about urban development, rural development, and I can't be perfect in all. So the first thing I did when I fought my election and I won was to actually invite people from Columbia and Harvard to actually come and work in my constituency. And in my first 5 years, my focus has been on education, health, and employment. Because firstly, I feel education and health is your base. That's your base through which you can then go out and someone who's young can get the perfect platform to actually go out and work and to create income for themselves. So Columbia has the Teachers College, which is known for being a very good institution in education. And I was able to get someone from there to come and start a teachers training college in my constituency. And then through our foundation, we started 3 schools, which now we have over 1,500 children. They all have the National Education Board, CBSE, which is the main board in India. And we're giving them all English-speaking education. And we've tied up with, and we only charge the children $10 a month. That's also only so that we can self-sustain the fees for the teachers we are bringing in. And we've tied up with this institute called Avanti, which was started by a Harvard Business School student called Akshay Saxena. Avanti, what they do is they bring in IITians. So IITs are like the MITs of India, and there are a number of them. So we have 5 IIT graduates who are staying in my constituency full time, and teaching and giving coaching in physics, chemistry, maths to like people who are from underprivileged families in my constituency. Secondly, in health, this is very interesting. I tied up with a professor from Harvard Medical School by the name of Dr. Ranu Dhillon. And so my belief is that in rural India, the main focus should be on early childhood and also on maternal health, because that's the basis of any person's future. And so primary healthcare is something which I've been working on for the last 3.5 years. And Dr. Ranu Dhillon, who was from Harvard, he one day contacted me when I was an MLA. I had just become one. And he mentioned about this music artist from the US called Macklemore. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about Macklemore. So Macklemore and Ryan Lewis, they are based in Seattle. And Ryan Lewis's mother had got AIDS 30 years back through blood transmission, where mistakenly someone who had AIDS, their blood came in the blood transfusion. And it's been 30 years now since she's been alive with AIDS. So they started a 30-30 project where, this is Ryan Lewis and Macklemore, where they are funding 30 clinics all around the world. And where they're funding each clinic $100,000 to get built, and then which will focus on primary healthcare. And I applied online for this project, and we've been able to get 10 clinics in my constituency. So 1 clinic is already made, and we'll start treating people there by the end of this month. And the second clinic will start getting, we've got the money for it as well, and that will start in May, the work for that. So, and we've started these clinics in really remote areas where a village is, say, around just 1,000, 1,500 people. And it's a big village, so it forms a center for around 20 villages close by. And in each center, we will focus on, monitoring every person who's in that area. So around 10,000 people, we'll have their health data of every person, whether it's their blood pressure, whether it's their vaccination data, whether it's an adult, whether it's someone who's very aged, or whether it's a newborn, and monitor their health through workers, volunteers who we have employed. So that's my main focus, which I'm pushing in the health sector. And lastly is employment, because I think that is really the biggest issue in India today. And before coming here, I was actually looking up online, and there was data which said that I think India's unemployment rate is like 4.8%, which I think is ridiculous, because I think it's easily reached at least 10 or 15%. And that's also an underestimate. I think a lot of people who say they are in agriculture are not actually in agriculture. It's called disguised unemployment in our part of the world. And so when I actually had the chance of inviting Professor Stiglitz in 2014 to my constituency, and I showed him the work which we are doing in education, and he was like, all this is fine, you're focusing on English, but this is not what you need. He said, you must focus. He said, look around you. He said, your 90% of your people here are focused on agriculture. He said, try and improve the outcomes. Today, they have 2 crops a year, but you must focus on livestock farming. Look at dairy, look at chicken farming, because farming today in India is mainly rain dependent. If you have a drought, if you have a hailstorm, that's it. And they only have income twice a year, which is in both their seasons, which are in Hindi is called Kharif and Rabi, are the 2 seasons, and that's the only time when they get money throughout the year. Whereas if they start a dairy project or chicken farming or poultry or something like that, or goat farming, they're able to get money regularly. In fact, in dairy, you get money every week. So he said, you must work on trying to get projects like this. So currently, that's my main focus, because I have another 1.5 years left. So these are some of the main projects which I've been working on so far.
Thank you. So Javed, listening to you, there's this famous saying, those who can't do, teach. Mm-hmm. But it sounds like you have people who do and teach, or teach and do, thanks to people like you. So I want to ask you both, one challenge in India, given the sheer scale of India, is if you look at the state level, there have been experiments that have been successful in agriculture, in employment, in health. Take maternal health, Tamil Nadu. There are, examples of enormous success in reducing maternal mortality, improving vaccinations. Your state, Madhya Pradesh, on livelihoods, has done some very successful pilots. My state, Rajasthan, on education. One of the big challenges is scaling up lessons, right? And the barriers come at the state level and at the national level. And one of the big challenges is taking information about successes from pilots at the local level and really trying to percolate that information upwards and design national policy. And as I understand it, this is very much what the Niti Aayog is trying to do, with the new planning commission. If you could both speak to what are some creative ways that India is currently bridging this divide or solving this very informational problem, if you will, of how do you take successes at the local level and then aggregate them and scale them up at the national level? And where do you think, some creative thinking could happen there? I'd be curious to know.
Would you like to go first?
Sure. Well, I do think, Niti's role, it's tough to kind of overstate. Well, sort of I think the desire for them to pick up and become that kind of an institution. The variety of things that they're doing, again, it's a bit more of a consultative process with states. Mm-hmm. Niti also, the groups of chief ministers, they've been pulling together to do work on digital payments, on trying to, they had a group of chief ministers that actually the Madhya Pradesh chief minister had chaired, which was looking at federal programs. How many of those should be mandatory? How many of those should be voluntary? What % should be funded? And letting the states really offer a lot of feedback based on their real life experiences on what it's like to carry out projects on the ground. I mentioned NITI is pulling together, and actually other ministries are in Delhi too as well, are putting together model laws and regulations. State administrative capacity of the bureaucracy can be pretty limited. I mean, carrying things out, the time you've got left at the end of the day to think about what would be the best way to do a pro-growth regulation on X, Y, or Z is difficult to have that kind of extra time and to search the world for the best ideas. And so if the center can work with the states on providing model laws and regulations in important growing areas, it makes a lot of sense. There also, and this is one of those things I every time I hear, like, how can we highlight things, you know, it's one of those documents I read, few people have, but it's exactly that. NITI Aayog pulled together a case book. It's, I don't know, maybe 200 pages long of like really cool, interesting sector by sector things that states had done. Like those pilot projects in any state, whether it was education or health or things like that. There's a compendium they issued last year that does exactly that. But the question is, how do you get it out there? How do you get people to pick it up and read it? I mean, the other problem that you've got, you know, is there are chief ministers that, you know, and we follow every week. We have a regulatory update to see which states are kind of leading. There are some states that are certainly, you know, running as fast as they can to get to the top. Mm-hmm. And there are other state governments, and I am happy to talk about those, that are very, very comfortable in pulling themselves to the bottom, or at least they just, you know, they just don't care to rise to the top. But there is a divide. So, you know, for a chief minister that's in it for personal enrichment, for helping the party, something like that, and not really for long-term development of the state, at least that's not the primary, it's going to be a lot tougher to get those folks to listen.
I think from the academic standpoint, you know, it's been about 15, 20 years now. There's been a massive push for decentralization of policy, and this has really played out in India, right, with rural development programs and so on. And yet all the academic evidence suggests that development policies work best when there's a sort of sandwich, right, when there's decentralization with support from the center. And what you were talking about was interesting because it's ways to kind of combine expertise at both levels. So I'm just curious, Jayavardhan, what is that?
Yes, I think when you're implementing something, it's much easier at the micro level, working with outside partners. But once you talk at the state level, at the central level, because just India is so vast, and you know, the government normally prefers to do things by itself. They may have, you know, an intelligent think tank, which may work as providing counseling to them or advice. But at the implementation level, the government likes to do things on its own. For example, in the UPS time, there were two policies which I think really looked at the village level, you know, development. One was NRHM, the National Rural Health Mission, which looked at creating these ASHA workers and Anganwadi workers, where you were given, at the village level, they looked at volunteers who would guide pregnant mothers, who would help malnourished children. And similarly, in the rural development sector, they had Manrega, which was, I think it's still quite a controversial, I mean, it has helped the villages a lot as well, but there's also been a lot of corruption in that. And but even today, if you see, it was a Congress policy, but it's got the highest funding this year by the Modi government. So it's something which I guess, if implemented properly, and if you can cover the leakages, it can be, you know, still a game changer in the rural part of India. Because, you know, what I've learned so far in India, it's so diverse that every village has a different issue. You know, for example, if I have hundreds of villages in my constituency, one village may have an issue of roads, of an approach road, while the second one may have no electricity. And so, you know, every village is different and unique. And Manrega, the National Rural Employment Guarantee Program, it gives every panchayat, which is the lowest form of, or the lowest form of rural government, to actually decide for itself what it really needs. So that's why I think it's important to keep learning from the outcomes and to keep trying to innovate these policies and bringing in more transparency in these programs. to, I guess, have better future implementation.
Let me offer a quick two-finger on this point too. If I had a magic wand, you mentioned the sandwich. It really, I mean, it sort of isn't. I mean, you've got strong federal policy making, you've got strong state governments. Probably, you even say panchayats. But city government in India, that's the thing. If I had a magic wand to empower cities to direct themselves more effectively and grow independently of state oversight, because when 2/3 of voters are still rural voters in Indian states, decision making is based on, and in fact, 2/3 of voters, 2/3 of people are in rural. They actually vote in higher percentages as well. So, we saw, I think, the lessons again of 2004, India's shining campaign, the BJP's big, these beautiful IT towers that have been built, and the perception, and we can all debate how much truth there is, but most people, the perception is that was what lost them the campaign, was showing people this great stuff that only benefited 1 million people. And so there was a blowback against that. Again, I don't know if that's exactly the truth, but that is the narrative most people kind of expect to some extent. If states, if cities had a little bit more self-determination authority to build their electric power grid without worrying about making sure that, cities, in my opinion, as they have been with any other country, are going to be the engines of growth. And in India, they're still constrained.
No, absolutely. I think, in fact, I've just written an article for Shashi Tharoor's next book. And in that I've mentioned that I think in the next 10, 15 years, the amount of rural to urban migration is going to even increase more. Because every farmer, every person living in a village wants their child to get better education. And you'll only get the best schools in the nearby town. And I'm seeing this across my constituency as well, where every family from the village has one member living in the town, which is close by, to get better access to education and health. And so towns, how the urban municipalities work is that they do have independence in terms of deciding which roads to build, what to do with their drainage, which areas to focus on, how much should their budget be. But like Rick said, in larger matter like energy, it's still again dependent on the energy sector. So yeah, that's a good point. Maybe we can look at some innovation there and see in what ways can actually larger goals be given as the
just take a look like Gurgaon. I mean, Gurgaon in some ways is the epitome of how fast things can move in some cases.
Unorganized.
But it's also the greatest tragedy.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Chennai, these places all had to introduce a modern economy in old cities. Gurgaon was nothing 20 years ago. It was farmland. And to take that and build these beautiful towers, everything that the developers were to do is great. These places are phenomenal. I remember the first time going to Gurgaon after these things started to come up. I'm like, Silicon Valley doesn't look this modern, but you consider that they've already run out of water. They're trucking in water in this brand new city. Everything that the state was supposed to provide to support that, is lacking there. So I think Gurgaon is, it's proof of the great things that can happen pretty quickly, but also the fact that, the state governments just aren't willing to keep up, I think, with some of the cool urban developments that are happening.
So it's probably, we're happy to take questions from the audience.
To Minister Singh, you're from Madhya Pradesh. It's in central India. It's a large area, almost equal to Rajasthan. I just looked it up. And I'm interested in your interests in maternal health, neonatal health, but I'll speak with you after, perhaps, about that. But what I notice about India, and maybe you could please help me with this, there are village dialects, there are town dialects, there are state dialects. With a province as large as Madhya Pradesh or Rajasthan, how do you effect policies or plans when India has so many official languages, as well as maybe 10-fold more, 20-fold more dialects and mother tongues. So can you say something about communication among people in cities, villages, and towns about that?
Yes, absolutely, and especially and specifically, if you speak about healthcare, I think that's what NRHM really aimed to do, is because every district or every block, which in India you call a tehsil, is so diverse and so different. Therefore, you need to have government paid workers at that micro level to really push forward your agenda. And I think the Indian government in the last 10, 15 years has been able to do that. So, you of course have your policies being made at the national level. The budget is given to the state, and the state makes its own budget as well. And then you have your district collectors, so I think a district like a county here, I guess. And you have your administrator at that level, who then is in charge of making sure that at the subdivision level and at the village level and at the urban body level, the government employees are able to really push forward as the agenda as it's prescribed. And I guess for a politician, our main goal is to make sure that that is being done properly and to control the corruption. Because to be honest, that's where India's real corruption exists. So at the national level, yes, you are sanctioning the money. But at the state level and at the village level, the bureaucracy there really has what in India is called cuts. So if you have, probably for a county you have 100 rupees sanction, out of which 20 will go in different government, officers working at different levels. 5% will go to the person at the block, probably 10% at the district, and then 5 or 10 more % at the state. That actually exists. It's not a joke. And no matter who's been the prime minister in the past, it is just so deeply entrenched in the system that even as a chief minister or as a minister or as an MLA or as a member of parliament, you cannot do much because it's there at every level. It's not only there in Delhi or only there in the capital. It is there in every county, in every sub-county. So I think that's, of course, is the biggest challenge. But like you said, sir, I think the government has, to a great extent, been able to, employ workers and volunteers at the local village level who can, I guess, communicate with the local dialect. And as you rightly said, Madhya Pradesh is a very vast state. We have a huge, I think, 35% forest cover, a large amount of tribal votes. And each tribal community has a different kind of a Hindi dialect. So, of course, everyone speaks Hindi, but it's a slightly different accent, I would say.
So I know we wanted to end on time. So do you mind if we collect a couple of questions at once? And then, okay, please.
We have a GST guru on stage. I just wanted to ask your thoughts on the rollout and implementation if we're looking 5 years down the road right now. What does it look like in your realm? Let's say this is a 21% threshold might be. How does it get implemented in your local district when it comes to businesses that are operating nationally or locally or however?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I was part of the GST discussion in the state parliament. And of course, I think overall, GST will benefit India in terms of it'll make taxation much more simpler and easier. I think where the main debate has been is the state's share and the state's loss of revenue in terms of the higher taxed commodities. The other issue which, as a politician, which I highlighted in the discussion, was there are certain essential commodities which at the moment, because we have the value-added tax and sales tax, are taxed at a very minimal level, which are, you would say, the essential commodities like food grains and other stuff. So the issue I raised was that the commodities which currently are being taxed at a 1% or 2%, to make sure that those are kept out of the GST so that the people who are the more needier groups don't have to bear the brunt of those commodities. That was my main issue with this. But yes, I think in the long term, it will benefit India overall. And I think if the government is able to effectively compensate the states, I think then it will overall hold India in good stead.
All right, I think we have time for one more question.
Can I ask a provocative question in just a second?
Yes, of course.
I kind of gathered you were from the Congress part. So, two-part question. I'm sorry?
Try using the mic.
Two-part question. First is, and I think Madhya Pradesh is ruled by the BJP.
15 years now.
Right. So, being a Congress MLA in a constituency in Madhya Pradesh, what kind of problems does that pose in trying to get resources from the state? That's point one. Second, do you think Congress is dead as a party?
I was expecting that question for a long time. And the first question is how to actually effectively work in such an environment is you must be in the good books of the bureaucrats, because they are the ones who really sanction the funds in every district, in every constituency. So I make sure that I'm in touch with all the bureaucrats and the ministers as well. You have to, because I guess, of course, we are in the opposition, but at the same time, I have to make sure that I nurture my constituency and all the government funds which are being available for roads, for electricity, for water, for irrigation. I'm able to bring in a good share for my constituency. And the second question about the Congress, which is, I guess, the biggest debate in the entire country right now. I guess it is a tough time for the party, and but just in 3.5 years, people have started thinking Congress is over, whereas the BJP was out of power for 10 years, and no one mentioned that. But I guess the Congress's biggest challenge at the moment is the loss of influence in the states. Today, the BJP's biggest strength is that they are in power across the Hindi cow belt, if I may say so. Whether it's Maharashtra, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, and these are the main were the base of the Congress. And when the Congress was in power in the 90s, in the first decade of the 2004 to 14. Our biggest strength was that we had state leaders who would pull in the votes at the national level. Today, like in Punjab, we again had to depend on Captain Amrinder Singh, who is now in his late 70s, I think, and who's been an ex-chief minister. Of course, it's a good thing we won Punjab, but I guess the biggest challenge is, where is the new generation? Why is the Congress not being able to bring in younger leaders who are in their 30s and 40s, and there are a number of them today, who've been ministers in the center, but are not being given full responsibility at the state level. And I feel that's what the Congress must do. Second thing which I feel the Congress must do is rebrand itself. I think today our national leadership is getting too involved in Hindu versus Muslim and right wing versus left wing, whereas the BJP is talking about development. And I think the Congress has to speak more about development, about the youth. I think today India's biggest crisis is unemployment. You have a large number of people who are engineers, who are 12th class pass, who've done a BA or like an arts course, but are not getting employed, and which is really I think the biggest anger against the UPA's second term. And I think BJP's biggest advantage and Modi's has been that it's been so proactive, And I think in today's world with social media being, so I think it's in every village now, people want to see their leader, be actively talking to the press, to the people, and trying to show the people what the leader's vision is. So I think if the Congress can do that, I think we will have a chance in 2019. Otherwise, it's, I think, a tough time ahead.
I got a couple of thoughts on that too, which is, you look at the state elections that just took place.
Yeah.
The 5 states. Congress won more seats than the BJP in 3 of the 5. A point that's often forgot because they, in total they lost because they lost a few in UP, but they weren't terribly strong either before or after. Congress remains the #2 party in almost every state in India. There still are, and talking about Indian state election incumbency results, it ranges anywhere from 25 to 50% re-election rates going back over the last 30 years. So this idea that the cycle's broken, that state governments are going to stay in power forever. So I think there's some natural gravitation too that's going to bring back. Aam Aadmi hasn't shown an ability to really pull seats in a substantial way outside Delhi. So them as a possible alternative, which some people talk about, is not really shown to be true. States like Rajasthan haven't reelected in decades and things like that. So I think there's going to be a natural where there will be a natural rebound just looking at election results over the last 3 years. I mean, maybe not, right? Because I mean, every time any of us ever thinks we know something about Indian politics, we're proven wrong. But really, I mean, if you look at what's happened over the last 30 years, the idea that the system's been broken and the BJP will reign forever, I will not bet my life savings, and I will not bet $5 on that. And Congress is sitting in the wings as the #2 party in almost every state where they're not in power right now.
I think the only contrarian view there is that Congress does not have a national leader the same charisma and stature as Modi.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably a major vacuum that they're facing.
There's good research that have been done in the past. And again, we saw a phenomenon 3 years ago that we hadn't seen before, but good research that shows, in fact, that a lot of voters, when their livelihoods get better, they tend to credit the government in office in their state. Not necessarily the national. I mean, that could be breaking that identification rate now too, but there is some data showing that, the attribution sometimes is not exactly where people kind of expected as well. But we're all learning every time.
Also, I think one thing which we all forget, yes, of course, I think Prime Minister Modi has been the main, catalyst for BJP's growth, but also the RSS. And people don't talk about it naturally because it's not a thing which Delhi discusses. And I think Indian media, especially the English media, is all Delhi-centric. But on the ground, I don't know if everyone knows this, but the BJP has over 100 sister organizations which work at the ground level and which together are very disciplined. Mm-hmm. And I think Congress's biggest weakness has been the lack of discipline that we have in choosing our leaders, in being able to really work as a dedicated organization. And the BJP is very strong there. They have a very, very dedicated cadre who is there in every village of this country. And even in places where they weren't there at all, like the northeast and the south of India, but they are working there now. So of course, I think the PM has been one of the main reasons, but it's also been their, I think, dedicated cadre, which is really strong at the moment. And with Congress, we have to face them because they are, of course, our biggest challenge.
So very big thank you to both of you. And then you've come all the way from Madhya Pradesh to Georgetown. So our students wanted to thank you with a very small commemorative thing to put in your office, in your constituency, we hope.
Well, it's an honor, and I think it's, thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you.
And you must, I invite you to come and do some work in the constituency as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.